Luke chapter number 2, because there's a tax given in the Christmas story. It's a vital part of the Christmas story. We treat it as a sort of a non-essential, but without that tax, there is a very different Christmas story. There's not the one that we know. The Bible says in Luke chapter number 2, verse number 1, it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. It reminds me, and I was thinking, and this is just a tip of the hat to the past, there's an old phrase, and I had to look it up because I didn't know where it came from. It said, nothing in life is certain except death and taxes. I didn't know that that was ascribed to Benjamin Franklin, but it's actually not his quote. He wrote that in a letter in 1769, I believe, or 1779. It must have been 79, excuse me. Must have been 79. He was talking about the new government and the system. He said, it looks like our new constitution is going to hold up and be permanent, but nothing is sure but death and taxes. It actually is not originated with him. It went back about 80 years before that in a book called The Cobbler of Preston. A man named Christopher Bullock in 1716 wrote that phrase. Franklin stole it, but he was more famous, and so it became ascribed to him. And so even back here in Franklin's day, taxes were a part of life. But before Franklin, 2,000 years previous, culture is dominated by levying of taxes. Leadership taking money from its people to pay for one thing or another. Now, the one thing the Bible doesn't tell us is this tax that Caesar Augustus levied, was it a fair tax? Was it a just tax? Was it a good tax that needed to be ascribed, or was it a frivolous tax that was used on some pet project? The Bible doesn't say. All it says is that there was a decree from Caesar that all the world, the known world, the world that was under the Roman rule, was going to be taxed. Not only was it a taxation just of a, come to your house and gather a little money from you at your door. It was more than that. It was a census tax where you had to now not only pay money, but you had to go back to the land of your birth and your ancestry, and you had to be accounted for and all of those things. Now, we read that verse. We know that verse. You probably could have quoted that verse. But have you ever stopped to think about what that meant to Mary and Joseph? Have you ever played that whole scenario out in your mind? What does this mean? They're sitting at home. Here comes the edict. Some sort of a proclamation happens in the town where they're residing. Hey, just been come down from on high. You got to go back home to your land of your ancestries. You've got to be accounted for, and you've got to pay. What would your reaction have been? Probably the same as when you find out there's a new tax here. You have got to be kidding me. I'm already getting taxed to death. I don't need to pay another tax. I'm sure there was much grumbling. I'm sure there was much hand-wringing. I'm sure there was much frustration and criticism of government and wasteful government spending and bureaucracies. But there's a tax. Now, they're not just two people sitting at home with no cares. They are on the way to having a child. The Bible doesn't say at what point they are in this, but they are obviously well along in the process. Now they've got the difficulties of making a trek to Bethlehem. I looked it up. I don't know the geography that well, but I looked it up, and if what I read is correct, it's about 90 miles from where they were to Bethlehem. So now you've got a trek. Now this isn't get in your Honda Civic and an hour and 15 minutes later you're on the doorstep. No, this is by animal. And according to what I read and those who are familiar with these types of things, they thought probably with a lady who was fairly along in her pregnancy, they thought about 10 miles a day is about all you could comfortably go on a trek like this. So now you've got not an hour and a half journey, you've got a 9-day trek. If 90 miles, 10 miles a day on average, you've got a 9-day trek. According to the people who study this stuff out, Israel in that time of the year when this was happening, the average daytime temperatures is in the mid-30s. At night, it's below freezing. So you don't have a pleasant travel. You have freezing temperatures. It's also the rainy time of the year. So now you have cold and wet. You have 10 miles a day on animal back with a pregnant wife. Can you imagine Joseph going, excuse me? Why is this happening? Why are we taking this? What's the process here? What's the purpose of all of this? Now, further study out, again, from people who are smarter than I, who know this type of thing, the path that they would have taken from there to there was a very hilly terrain. So now you've got the topography that becomes a factor. You've also got wooded sections that were very heavily, I don't know what you call, flooded with wild animals, some of which were very dangerous to human beings, lions and bears namely. It was also a road that was heavily used by bandits who would rob and pilfer people as they came through. So you've got a treacherous journey. You've got 9 days worth of a journey in cold weather. All of these things, you can imagine Joseph going, wait a minute, this just doesn't work. This isn't right. Why is this happening to me? Why are we going through this whole process? Well, to find the answer to that, you have to think back 700 years to the book of Micah, chapter number 5, verse number 2, where God declares that out of Bethlehem, the Messiah would be born. Right. Joseph and Mary are going through an arduous process, which by all human understandings would not have been a fun situation. They would not have chosen that path for themselves. And yet God, through a decree from a Roman emperor, miles and miles and hundreds of miles away, a decree from a Roman emperor forces their hand to make a trek that they would have never made. I started thinking in my mind, what other reason would there have been for Joseph to have said, you know what, Mary, let's just pack up back, let's go back home. You're 8 months pregnant. This seems like a good time to travel. I tried to think in my mind what other possible reasonings there could be why they would voluntarily take that trek. And I literally could not come up with one. There probably is some convoluted situation, but it would be a very, very difficult situation that would cause you that far along in a pregnancy, knowing the time of year, knowing the terrain, knowing all of these factors that would be determining no's, to set all those aside and say, let's make that trek. There would have been no reason. But God causes or allows Caesar Augustus, a man with no concept of Mary, Joseph, and a Messiah to be born, allows his edict to force them on a journey to put them in Bethlehem just at the time when she should be delivered. To fulfill God's promise from 700 years ago in the book of Micah. Now, I started wrestling with this and I started thinking through this. And I said, why is this a big deal? Why all of this process to get through all of these things? God chose Bethlehem for a specific reason. That's of God's knowing. I suppose he could have chosen any town, but he put his word out there that the Messiah was going to be born in Bethlehem. He put it in print. He had his prophet write down, this will happen. And he had to fulfill his word. Right. Now, I don't know if you've considered this, and I have to confess, a lot of these thoughts, I've never thought about this very deep, and that's shame on me. But do you remember when the wise men came to Herod and they said, where is the Messiah going to be born? Herod went to the scribes, and they knew exactly in what town the Messiah was going to be born. They said, it's Bethlehem. Herod went and had all the children killed in that part of the country. Would Mary and Joseph not have known that same prophecy? They knew she is going to give birth to the Messiah. The angel told them that. They knew Bethlehem. Or at least they had that information was available to them. They know Bethlehem. They know she's, 7, 8 months pregnant. Why were they not already on the journey there themselves? For some reason, lack of knowledge, lack of willingness, just not connecting dots. We don't know. The Bible doesn't say. I'm not trying to indict. What I'm saying is there was opportunity for themselves to put themselves in Bethlehem way before this time, but they didn't do it. They didn't put themselves to fulfill the prophecy. They weren't in the right place where God needed them to be for his word to be fulfilled. So he causes Caesar Augustus to issue a tax, not only of finances, but of forced travel to put them in a place where they would be at the right place so that the prophecy in Micah would be fulfilled and we would have a Messiah born in Bethlehem. So because, why is it so important? Just to teach them a lesson, get where I'm supposed to be? God's very character was at stake. God, which cannot lie. He had declared, Bethlehem is it. Take it to the bank. And he did what had to be done to put them in the place to fulfill his word. Now, Mary and Joseph probably at the time did not understand. I am guessing day 7 of the journey, cold, wet, hungry, not having fun, sitting on a donkey, very much pregnant, was not their first choice. And they probably rebelled and kicked and said, God, why are you doing this to us? I thought we were chosen. I thought you had said she was preferred amongst women. I thought you said she was blessed. Why is this happening to us now? Well, I'll tell you why. Because God's character was at stake. And he took them through a path and he walked them through it and he got them there safely and he allowed all the things to bring it to pass so that she was in the right place, and he did not allow tragedy to take place that would have cost them. But his word was at stake. There was a prophecy made. The prophecy had to be fulfilled. Yes. Now, you say, okay, fine. Neat thought. Where does that apply to me? Well, I'm glad you asked that. Because God has given a prophecy about you as well. Do you know? Many. But one specifically is in the book of Romans, chapter number 8, verse number 28. God says, and we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are called according to his purpose. God has issued a prophecy about you. And that is, every scenario he takes you through is going to be for your good. And when we're going through on day 7 of the arduous trek and things don't seem to make sense, what in the world is going on here? Why am I going through this difficult path? I didn't want this. This isn't good. This doesn't look right. This doesn't feel right. Why is this happening to me? I'll tell you why it's happening. Because there's a prophecy at stake. And the very character of God is on the line. God has declared he is going to do right by you. God has declared that every scenario he takes you through is going to be good for you. Does that mean that the cold, rainy donkey ride was a fun thing? Absolutely not. I'm glad I didn't have to take it. But was it necessary? Absolutely. It was part of the plan. It was where God needed them to be. It was for their good, fulfillment of prophecy. Now God has made a prophecy not only just about where you'll be, but how he is going to deal with you. How he is going to treat you and what you can take to the bank. And that is the truth, that God does good and only good for his people. Even when the road seems rough, even when the path seems uncertain, even when it seems unfun, God's character, his very reputation is at stake. If he had allowed Mary and Joseph to stay in Nazareth, in the nice established place where they were going, where they had a home, where everything was in place and everything was comfortable, had he allowed them to stay in their comfort, do you understand that God would have now been a liar? Salvation would not be available. He had to put them in Bethlehem. Do you understand that if God does not fulfill Romans 8:28 in your life, he is a liar? Yeah. You are not worth God's character. He's not going to destroy his character and his perfect record on you or me. He is going to do what the prophecy said he's going to do, which was put a Messiah born in Bethlehem. Even if it takes a moving of the world to put him there, he'll do what it takes. If God has to move the world to fulfill Romans 8:28 in your life, he's just as willing and just as ready to do that because his character is at stake. Perhaps a different look at the Christmas story tonight, but I hope it's been an encouragement as it has been in mine. Let's pray, and we'll be dismissed tonight.